The silence of my study was a meticulously crafted thing, a bulwark against the ceaseless, shallow chatter of the contemporary world. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through the leaded glass, illuminating stacks of forgotten lexicons and crumbling papyri. Here, amidst the scent of aged paper and dry ink, I, Arthur, found my truest company. For years, my life had been a meticulous excavation of the past, sifting through the linguistic debris of civilizations long swallowed by the earth, seeking the echoes of minds that thought in tongues no living soul remembered. My particular obsession lay in the untranslatable, the glyphs of forgotten cults and the ciphers of pre-dynastic kings, fragments of thought so ancient they seemed to hum with a resonance beyond mere history. A sharp rap on my heavy oak door, unannounced and utterly alien to my routine, shattered the quiet. My hand, poised over a fragile cuneiform tablet, twitched. I rarely entertained visitors, and even rarer, unexpected ones. I rose, my movements stiff, a stranger to haste. Through the peephole, a figure stood cloaked in shadow, though the afternoon sun still held sway. A messenger, perhaps, though one whose posture exuded an unsettling stillness. He held a thick, unmarked envelope. Without a word, he simply extended it, then turned and vanished down the corridor, leaving only the faint scent of ozone in his wake. I closed the door, the click echoing too loudly in the renewed quiet. No address, no sender's mark. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate touch required for brittle parchment, tore the seal with uncharacteristic force. Inside, a single sheet of heavy stock paper, crisp and stark, lay folded. Its texture was unlike any I had encountered, almost metallic, yet pliable. The lettering, a precise, impersonal sans serif, spoke of an organization with limitless resources and an absolute demand for discretion. They required my unique expertise, my ability to discern patterns in the utterly alien, to coax meaning from the seemingly meaningless. The subject, an artifact, recently unearthed from an Antarctic ice sheet. Its description was sparse, evocative, and profoundly unsettling. Impossibly ancient, the text read, bearing glyphs of unknown origin, luminescent and seemingly alive. No further details, no hint of its purpose or composition. My breath hitched. My entire life had prepared me for this moment, though I had never dared to dream of such a find. This wasn't some minor dialectal variant of a known root. This was a language from beyond the reach of human memory, perhaps even human genesis. My mind, a labyrinth of forgotten grammars and defunct syntaxes, pulsed with a fierce, almost predatory excitement. Then came the second shock. The remuneration was astronomical, a sum that dwarfed my lifetime earnings, offered with a casualness that spoke of bottomless coffers. But the money was a secondary concern, a mere footnote to the intellectual Everest they presented. The true currency was the knowledge, the sheer unprecedented scope of the challenge. My current academic affiliations were to be severed without explanation. My life, as I knew it, would cease. I walked to my window, the weight of the offer pressing on me. The late afternoon sun was already dipping below the skeletal trees bordering the university grounds. Beyond them, a thin, persistent wind whipped across the expansive, desolate surface of the frozen lake, a place I often sought for clarity. Its crystalline expanse, scarred by the seasons, reflected the dying light in fractured silver. My reflection in the glass was a gaunt, unblinking stranger, framed by the familiar chaos of my study. The words of the offer spun in my head, a siren song of unimaginable discovery. The world had always felt too small, too predictable, its histories too well trodden. Here, now, was an invitation to step beyond the known, to touch the very edge of what humanity had ever conceived. The glyphs, luminescent and seemingly alive, what did that even mean? A language that breathed? The logical part of my mind screamed caution. Such secrecy, such extreme measures, suggested dangers far beyond the academic. This was not merely translation, this was an immersion into something utterly alien, something that had lain dormant beneath the ice for epochs. What truths could such an object hold, and what would be the cost of unearthing them? This was the ultimate text, the primordial utterance. To refuse would be to deny the very core of my being. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my life was about to irrevocably change. I picked up the pen, its familiar weight a small comfort, and signed the document. The ink, black against the heavy paper, seemed to absorb the fading light, solidifying my decision, sealing my fate. The world outside the armored transport had blurred into a monochrome smear of white and gray, a ceaseless, featureless expanse that swallowed all sense of direction. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the drone of the engines and the deepening chill that seeped through the vehicle's reinforced shell. My own breath plumed before me, a ghost in the insulated cabin. I had left behind the comforting scent of ancient parchment and the quiet hum of my own solitude, traded it for this sterile capsule, hurtling towards an unknown that promised to eclipse all my carefully curated knowledge. Finally, the vehicle slowed, its treads grinding against what felt like packed ice. A vast, desolate frozen lake stretched to the horizon on our right, its surface like shattered glass under the anemic sky, a perfect mirror to the cold dread that was beginning to settle in my chest. No windows broke its severe facade, only a single, massive door, like the maw of some dormant beast. This was the secluded, high-tech research facility. The door retracted with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a cavernous bay lit by harsh, overhead fluorescence. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, introduced herself as the lead researcher. Her voice was calm, precise, devoid of any discernible warmth. The other, a burly security chief, remained silent, his gaze sweeping the interior of our vehicle before motioning us forward. My mind, usually a reservoir of obscure etymologies and forgotten phonemes, found itself grasping at nothing, adrift in this alien landscape of steel and concrete. Environmental controls are at optimum. We've done all we can to stabilize its immediate surroundings. Stabilize. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. What could not be stable? And then I saw it. In the center of the room, cradled within a field of shimmering, almost imperceptible force, stood the artifact. It was an obsidian-like monolith, impossibly smooth, absorbing the harsh overhead light rather than reflecting it. It stood perhaps 10 feet tall, tapering slightly at the top, its form both elegant and profoundly unsettling. My eyes traced its contours, searching for any imperfection, any sign of terrestrial origin. There was none. And then I saw the glyphs. They were not etched or carved, but seemed to exist within the surface, a swirling galaxy of bioluminescent symbols that pulsed with a faint, internal light. They shifted, subtly, like motes of dust in a sunbeam, or plankton in a deep ocean current. A low, persistent hum emanated from the monolith, a sound felt more in the bones than heard by the ears, a vibration that resonated with something deep and dormant within me. It was not a mechanical hum, it was organic, almost a sigh. We've designated it the obelisk, the lead researcher said, gesturing with a gloved hand. Standard protocols are in place. You'll be working from a remote console for initial analysis, then directly within the chamber, behind the barrier, once we're confident of.
Containment. Containment. The word again. What exactly were they containing?
I approached the console, a holographic interface glowing with diagrams and sensor readings.
I activated the magnified view, bringing the glyphs into sharper focus.
They defied all logic. They were intricate, yes, but not in any way I understood.
No known linguistic family, no ancient script, no pictographic system offered even a fleeting resonance.
They were fluid, constantly reshaping themselves, not like a fixed alphabet, but a living, breathing language in perpetual flux.
It was like trying to read water.
I tried to input parameters, to categorize, to search for patterns, for repetition, for any vestige of a grammatical structure.
Nothing.
Each symbol seemed to hold within it an entire narrative, yet dissolve into another form before I could truly grasp it. Frustration, a familiar companion in my more challenging endeavors, began to prickle at me.
But beneath it, something else stirred, a strange, almost intoxicating compulsion. The glyphs, for all their alienness, were beautiful in a terrifying way, a window into a mind utterly divorced from human experience.
I found myself leaning closer, drawn by the faint, pulsing light, the subtle hum that now felt less like a vibration and more like a whispered invitation. My linguistic mind, honed by decades of wrestling with the dead tongues of humanity, felt like a child's toy against this impossible task.
Yet, I couldn't tear my gaze away.
The monolith was not merely an object, it was a presence, a deep, silent observer. The tension in the chamber was palpable, a silent current flowing between me and the black, humming stone.
The holographic interface pulsed, a shimmering tapestry of data unfurling before me.
Diagrams of the monolith, its impossible geometry rendered in cool blue light, floated above sensor readings that hummed with cryptic energy.
What, indeed, were they containing?
My gaze drifted from the console to the object itself, a vast, dark presence at the chamber's heart. It seemed to absorb light, a void even in the bright, sterile environment. Days blurred into a continuous cycle of analysis, the outside world a distant, irrelevant hum. My task was here, with the glyphs. They were not etched or carved but seemed to exist within the monolith's surface, shifting, bioluminescent patterns that glowed with an internal, alien light. Each character, a miniature nebula, pulsed with a rhythm that felt both ancient and utterly new. My fingers danced across the console's controls, zooming, rotating, isolating sequences. I began by cataloging, by sheer brute force, every unique symbol. I cross-referenced, I compared, I built provisional phonologies based on frequency and context, methods honed over decades of deciphering forgotten tongues, but this defied every known linguistic structure. Terrestrial languages, even the most archaic, possessed an underlying logic, a human resonance. These glyphs were a language of non-space, of anti-logic. A faint flicker caught the corner of my eye. The overhead lights, I thought, perhaps a minor fluctuation in the power grid. I blinked, rubbed my temples, and returned to the screen. The symbols seemed to writhe, their internal light intensifying, then dimming, in a pattern that wasn't random, but also not one I could immediately grasp. It was like trying to read a tide chart for an ocean that existed only in dreams. Hours bled into more hours. My determination, a brittle shield against the encroaching strangeness, held firm. I was a linguist, a problem solver. This was the ultimate problem. I isolated a sequence, a recurring cluster of glyphs that appeared at seemingly pivotal junctures. They were complex, almost fractal in their design, each element mirroring the whole in miniature. It was not a language I knew, nor even a sound, but an implication of sound, a phantom resonance. My head snapped up. The chamber was silent, save for the hum of machinery. Just stress, I told myself, the isolation. The sheer weight of this impossible task. I shivered, though the air conditioning maintained a constant, comfortable temperature. I remembered the blurry satellite images, the deep gouge in the ice, the sheer scale of the operation to extract it. I pushed the phantom sensations aside. Focus, Arthur. Focus. The patterns. I had identified 6 primary recurring sequences, each a distinct phrase or concept. They were not linear, not sequential in any human sense. They spiraled, inverted, nested within each other. It was a syntax of recursion, of self-reference, a language that spoke not about things, but was the thing it described. And the more I traced these patterns, the more a horrifying realization began to bloom in the sterile confines of my mind. These were not just symbols for information. They were instructions. They seemed to emanate from the monolith itself, a low, resonant thrumming that I felt more than heard. This was not the sterile environment playing tricks. This was something else. I leaned closer to the console, ignoring the tremor in my hand, my gaze fixed on a particular sequence. It was one of the 6 recurring patterns, the most elaborate. Its internal luminescence flared, then dimmed, almost as if responding to my focus. As I watched, the sequence began to subtly reconfigure, elements within it shifting, mirroring something I had seen in another, seemingly unrelated cluster. A connection. A terrible, elegant, horrifying connection. This language was not meant to be read, but to be experienced. And now, I was its gateway. My determination, a brittle shield against the encroaching strangeness, urged me onward. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford, not with this ancient tongue beckoning, its secrets whispering just beyond the veil of my understanding. My fingers, stiff with a fatigue that had become a constant companion, hovered over the control panel. The bioluminescent glyphs on the screen shimmered, each symbol a knot of primordial thought, a challenge to the very structure of human cognition. I had been working for what felt like days, the concept of time blurring into an endless cycle of decipherment and revelation. A new sequence of glyphs materialized, pulled from a deeper layer of the artifact's structure. These were more elaborate, more unsettling than anything I had encountered before. They twisted, not merely in their visual representation, but in the way they seemed to rearrange the very space around them in my mind's eye. I felt a prickle of unease, a cold awareness that I was not merely translating language, but unveiling something that had been deliberately obscured. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the cool air. The symbols spoke of vast, cyclical movements, not of stars or planets, but of existence itself. They described a turning, a great hunger that consumed and was reborn, an endless cosmic respiration. And within this cycle, there were entities. Not beings of flesh and blood as I understood it, but configurations of will, consciousnesses that predated light, forms that defied the very notion of form. The glyphs hinted at their silent vigil, their patience spanning epochs, their dominion of forgotten truth. My head began to throb, a dull ache behind my eyes that resonated with the frequency of the artifact's hum. The words, once translated, did not merely exist on the screen, they burrowed into my thoughts, reshaping the landscape of my inner world. Those who were before, the passage seemed to intone, they slumber in the interstitial spaces, awaiting the congruence of the turning. The phrasing was not literal. A distillation of concepts too vast for my terrestrial lexicon. It was a language of pure idea, a psychic contagion. The glyphs pulsed brighter, their internal light seeming to intensify, reflecting in the sheen of sweat on my forehead. My hands trembled as I typed, meticulously logging each translated fragment, each horrifying nuance. This wasn't merely information, it was an invitation. An invitation for something to reclaim its dominion, as the premise had suggested. The last symbol in the sequence faded, leaving an afterimage burned onto my retina. I slumped back in my chair, the plastic creaking under my sudden weight. The air grew heavy, thick with the unsaid, the unseen. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had crossed a threshold. The knowledge was no longer outside me, it was within. Exhaustion finally claimed me, a sudden, overwhelming wave that dragged me down. I must have drifted off right there, head lolling against the cold metal of the console. The dream came immediately, not as a gentle descent into slumber, but as a violent plunge into a reality far stranger than any waking nightmare. I was standing on a frozen lake, its surface an impossible expanse of obsidian ice, stretching to a horizon that curved unnaturally. Above, the sky was not black, but a swirling vortex of deep, bruised purples and greens, like an oil slick on a cosmic ocean. Stars were not pinpricks of light, but gaping, hungry mouths. The geometry of the world was wrong. Distant mountains did not rise but folded inward upon themselves, their peaks dissolving into impossible angles. The ice beneath my feet was not flat, but subtly rippled with patterns that defied Euclidean space, shifting and reforming with a silent, terrifying logic. Then, from the depths of the frozen lake, something began to rise. It was vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent. Its emergence was not a hostile act, but simply being. I knew, with the clarity of dreams, that this was what the glyphs had spoken of. This was a fragment of the those who were before, a glimpse into the interstitial spaces. My mind screamed, but no sound escaped my throat. I was small, insignificant, a fleeting thought in the presence of something truly primordial. I felt my sanity fraying at the edges, dissolving like mist in a gale. The knowledge was a contagion, and it was spreading. Its cool blue hum, the cryptic energy readings, the diagrams of the monolith's impossible geometry, all were still present, but the word containment that had resonated in my mind now echoed with a new, chilling meaning. It wasn't just about the artifact, it was about me. My fingers, stained faintly purple from the glyph's bioluminescence, traced the shimmering data, but my thoughts drifted, caught in a widening web of suspicion. His infrequent visits, once marked by a shared, if strained, intellectual curiosity, were now brief, almost perfunctory inspections. The occasional technician who brought supplies or performed system checks moved with a quietude that felt less respectful and more apprehensive. Their voices, when they spoke, were muted, their glances fleeting, as if my presence itself were a contagion. I could feel their distance, a widening chasm of understanding. They didn't see it, did they? They saw data, a project, an object to be contained. They saw the flickering symbols as mere information, a puzzle to be solved and filed away. But I saw the truth. I felt the truth. The glyphs were not inert, they pulsed with a dormant, terrible sentience. Each translated phrase, each unearthed concept, was a tendril reaching out, not from a dead past, but from an impossibly ancient present. The artifact wasn't a record of something that was, it was an invitation for something that is to return. This wasn't merely a translation, it was an awakening. And they, in their sterile, data-driven world, remained deaf, blind, utterly oblivious to the true nature of what I was unearthing. My translation notes, once meticulously organized and filed for review, began to accumulate in a haphazard, desperate pile beside my console. Loose sheets, scribbled with my increasingly frantic interpretations, lay buried beneath others, protected by the sheer volume of their disarray. I started to keep a separate, hidden journal, a small, leather-bound book I had brought with me, now crammed with insights too unsettling, too profound, too dangerous to share with the official logs. The official logs, I realized, were a trap, a mechanism for control. They wanted to know what I knew, but they didn't want to understand it. They wanted to contain the knowledge, not comprehend its true, horrifying implications. The camera's small, unblinking eyes mounted in the corners of my chamber seemed to track my every movement with a renewed intensity. I imagined unseen watchers, poring over the feeds, dissecting my gestures, analyzing the minute tremors in my hands. Each subtle shift in the air conditioning, each distant hum from the facility's vast machinery, became a potential signal, a coded message, a confirmation of their constant surveillance. Sometimes, when the hum of the systems grew too insistent, or the glyphs on the interface pulsed with an almost unbearable intensity, my mind would drift, seeking an anchor in the familiar. But even this mental refuge became tainted. I began to see figures on the distant ice, indistinct shapes moving with a strange, gliding motion, their forms blurred by the imagined distances, yet their presence radiating a silent, watchful malevolence. They were not human. Sleep was a fractured thing, riddled with visions of impossible geometries and the silent, pressing weight of an ancient consciousness. I was alone, truly alone, with a knowledge too vast, too terrible, for human sanity to bear. I was no longer Arthur, the linguist. The word containment had etched itself into the very marrow of my thoughts, a cold, crystalline echo that resonated with the sterile hum of the holographic interface. My fingers, once so eager to trace the contours of ancient scripts, now hesitated, a tremor not of fatigue but of something deeper, a nascent dread. I returned to the fragment I had been wrestling with, a sequence describing not a place or an event, but a state. It spoke of geometries that folded inward, dimensions that bled into one another like ink on wet parchment, and entities that were less beings and more the fundamental distortion of reality itself. They were the impossible made manifest, existing in the spaces between existence. My eyes, strained and burning, traced the flowing lines. The text described them as the unfolding, beings whose forms were anathema to perception, their presence a rupture in the fabric of what I understood as space. The language itself seemed to warp as I translated, words like confluence and aberration taking on new, terrifying weight. My mind struggled, grasping for anchors in a sea of impossible concepts. I pushed away from the console, the cool air of the facility suddenly feeling thick and suffocating. The polished chrome of the desk, the precise angles of the monitoring equipment, they began to shimmer. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, I saw the glyphs, not etched upon a screen, but woven into the very grain of the composite material, twisting the straight lines into impossible curves, the smooth surfaces into rippling, almost breathing textures. My heart thrummed, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. The patterns receded, leaving only the familiar, sterile order. A trick of the light, I told myself, a symptom of exhaustion. But the seed was planted. I saw them again in the intricate wiring snaking across the ceiling, in the condensation patterns on a forgotten coffee mug, in the way a shadow fell across the floor. They were everywhere, these glyphs, these impossible geometries, mocking me from the mundane. My reality, once so solid, was now a fragile membrane, stretched thin and threatening to tear. Needing air, needing distance from the relentless glow of the interface, I found my way to an observation deck, a rarely used annex overlooking the frigid landscape. Through the reinforced glass, a vast, flat expanse of white stretched out, unbroken save for the distant, jagged line of the mountains. Before me, stark and unforgiving, lay the frozen lake. Its surface, a sheet of milky ice, reflected the gray sky with an almost painful clarity. But there was no solace. As I stared, the cracks and fissures spiderwebbing across the ice began to shift. The natural imperfections, the ancient scars of winter's grip, coalesced into familiar shapes. The curling lines, the nested angles, the symbols of the unfolding, they were there, etched into the frozen surface of the lake, vast and terrifyingly clear. They seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light, mirroring the artifact's glow, even under the dull afternoon sky. My breath fogged the glass, momentarily obscuring the vision, but when it cleared, they were still there, a monstrous, silent script written across the world. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a deeper infection, a parasitic knowledge that was rewriting my very perception. The artifact wasn't just describing these entities, it was imprinting them onto my mind, showing me the world through their impossible lens. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a strange, manic energy. The boundaries between my thoughts and the artifact's truth were blurring, dissolving. What was being contained? The artifact, or me? Or perhaps something far older, far vaster, that merely waited for the language to be fully spoken, for the invitation to be complete. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that I was no longer merely translating a dead language, I was learning the grammar of madness, and it was speaking through me, shaping the very world I inhabited. My fingers, once so eager to trace the contours of ancient scripts, now hesitated, a tremor not of fatigue but of something deeper, a premonition of unraveling. Yet, a stubborn current of determination pulsed beneath my fear. I had committed. I would see this through, whatever the cost. The artifact, a silent, pulsing heart of unknowable antiquity, seemed to mock my resolve, its bioluminescent glyphs shifting with a subtle, predatory grace. I had moved on to a section of the script that felt denser, its patterns more intricate, like a woven tapestry of impossible geometries. The air in the translation chamber, usually a precisely controlled climate, felt thick, heavy, as if pressurized by unseen forces. My eyes, strained from hours of intense focus, burned. The faint light from the console cast my reflection back at me, a gaunt stranger with haunted eyes. A particularly potent sequence of glyphs shimmered into focus, a cluster that resisted my linguistic frameworks, twisting logic into knots. It wasn't just a language, it was an instruction, a sequence of triggers. As I meticulously mapped its syntax, a profound pressure built behind my temples, a sensation akin to deep-sea diving without proper equalization. My vision blurred at the edges, the sterile walls of the chamber momentarily softening, undulating. But the unease lingered, a cold dread seeping into my core. I needed air, real air, an escape from the artifact's silent, pervasive influence. Leaving the console, my movements felt sluggish, my limbs heavy with an invisible weight. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the underground bunker, the hushed footsteps of the security personnel, the distant murmur of unseen operations, all fading into a dull drone. My destination was the surface access, a small, reinforced door that led to the desolate Antarctic landscape. Stepping out, the world was a stark canvas of white and gray. A desolate wind whipped at my parka, stinging my exposed skin. Its surface, a mirror of gray-white sky, stretched infinitely, etched with crystalline patterns like an alien calligraphy. I stood at its edge, gazing into the opaque depths, seeking a clarity that eluded me. The intricate frost patterns on the lake's surface began to shift, to ripple not with water, but with light, the same unsettling bioluminescence of the artifact. The air grew heavy, thick with that metallic, organic scent. Then it happened. The frozen lake shattered, not with a sound, but with a silent, retinal explosion. It wasn't just in the lake, it was the lake, the sky, the very fabric of reality tearing to accommodate its immeasurable bulk. The wind howled, but it was a soundless shriek within my own mind, a psychic laceration. This was not a creature, it was a truth, raw and unyielding. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The frozen lake was still there, an unbroken expanse of ice under a gray sky. The world was solid, real, mundane. I gasped, a ragged, choking sound that tore from my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The image, burned into the retina of my mind, refused to recede. The impossible colors, the aberrant geometry, the silent, terrible ascent, it was too vivid, too profoundly other to be a mere figment of an overtired mind. Had the artifact, in its silent translation, begun to translate me? Had I glimpsed not a vision, but a reality, a fraction of the truth that lay dormant beneath the ice, stirring now because I had given it voice? The lines blurred. The hours had ceased their march, instead bleeding into a gray, indistinguishable smear. My reflection, when I dared to glance at it, was a stranger's gaunt specter. The skin stretched taut across my cheekbones, my eyes recessed into shadowed hollows, two burning coals in a skull-like frame. My trousers, once a snug fit, now hung loose, a testament to the rapid decay of my physical form. Each morning, the tremors began anew, a faint internal shivering that escalated into a pronounced, uncontrollable vibration of my hands, making the simplest act of lifting a mug a perilous endeavor. Sleep, a distant memory, had abandoned me entirely. My mind, stripped bare of its restorative balm, felt frayed at the edges, a raw nerve exposed to the biting wind of an incomprehensible reality. For 3 days, I barricaded myself within my living quarters, a small, sterile box within the sprawling underground bunker. I attempted to immerse myself in other texts, ancient Sumerian tablets, forgotten runic scripts, anything that offered the comforting solidity of human endeavor. I traced the familiar curves of cuneiform, the angular lines of Elder Futhark, but the glyphs blurred, coalescing into the impossible bioluminescent patterns of its language. My tongue, dry and furred, seemed to ache with the phantom taste of its alien resonance. The quiet hum of the bunker's ventilation system became a mocking drone, a constant reminder of the unseen presence in the translation chamber just down the corridor. It was a physical ache, a deep-seated craving that coiled in my gut, tightening with each passing hour I spent away. My determination, once a sturdy mast against the storm, now felt like splintered wood. I paced, a caged animal, the floorboards groaning under my restless weight. My mind conjured images, not of the glyphs, but of the very space around the artifact, the sterile chamber, the faint shimmer of its light seeping under the door. Then, the visions began to intrude, not just the impossible geometries from before, but a landscape, stark and unforgiving. I saw a vast, desolate expanse, a world sculpted by endless cold. A frozen lake stretched into the horizon, its surface a mirror of fractured silver under a sky the color of bruised amethyst. Cracks, like veins of black ice, webbed across its surface, deep fissures that seemed to pulse with a silent, ancient rhythm. This vision was not a memory, nor a dream, but a sudden, intrusive clarity, as if a window had been flung open in my mind, revealing a place I had never seen, yet instinctively recognized as its origin. My body, though trembling, seemed to move of its own accord. My feet, leaden just moments before, now carried me with a strange, unnatural swiftness towards the door. I reached the corridor, the sterile fluorescent lights humming above. The air here felt different, charged with a subtle, electrical tension. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged gasp. My hand, shaking violently, reached for the handle. It wasn't a desire to understand, not anymore. It was a hunger, a profound, unholy yearning that had taken root deep within my being, drawing sustenance from my very essence. My body was a husk, my mind a fractured lens, but the artifact's pull was absolute. I pushed the door open, the soft hiss of the seal a sound of finality. The chamber, bathed in the soft, sickly glow of the ancient object, beckoned. My eyes, though burning with fatigue, were drawn inexorably to the glyphs, each luminescent symbol a siren song I was no longer capable of resisting. My own flesh, my own spirit, had betrayed me, delivering me back into its silent, terrible embrace. My throat ached, raw from disuse, and a tremor ran through my hands, not of cold, but of an internal vibration. I recoiled from the glass, the stranger's stare too accusatory, too knowing. The artifact called, a silent thrumming beneath the skin of the world. Each glyph, an intricate filigree of luminescence, seemed to writhe with a nascent life. My instruments, once trusted extensions of my will, now felt clumsy, inadequate. The facility's hum, usually a distant drone, had sharpened into a high-pitched whine that resonated behind my eyes. The latest passage, a swirling constellation of symbols, had resisted me for days. It was not merely complex, it felt resistant, like a living thing recoiling from my touch. I had to know. The hunger for understanding eclipsed all else: sleep, sustenance, sanity. My fingers, stained with the faint, persistent residue of the artifact's strange glow, traced the lines on my translation tablet. The symbols shifted, coalesced, then fragmented again, like dreams upon waking. I muttered the proto-sounds, the guttural clicks and elongated vowels I'd painstakingly reconstructed, feeling their vibrations deep within my own chest. Each sound was a key, a specific resonance meant to unlock something, but what? I had assumed it was meaning, a narrative. The passage spoke not of events, but of states. Not of things done, but of things being. It was less a chronicle and more a declaration. The language itself was not designed for communication in the human sense. It was a blueprint, a sequence, an instruction. My breath hitched. Their light deepening, pulsing with an internal rhythm that was suddenly, horrifyingly, familiar. My own pulse quickened, mirroring its beat. The translation was not merely revealing information, it was activating it. Each word I deciphered, each sound I vocalized, was a drop of water on dry earth, slowly rousing something ancient and vast. The artifact was not a tool, not a text, but a dormant consciousness, waiting. waiting for the specific vibrational frequency of its language to be articulated, to be felt, to be understood. And I, Arthur, the reclusive linguist, was the unwitting conduit. My meticulous work, my intellectual curiosity, my very being, was the mechanism of its rebirth. My hand shook violently, sending the stylus clattering across the metal table. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen presence. It wasn't just the artifact's light I saw now, but shimmering distortions at the periphery of my vision, like heat haze over an ancient, impossible desert. It can't be. The entity, whatever it was, had no form I could perceive, no voice I could hear with my ears. But I felt it, a profound, alien intelligence pressing against the delicate membranes of my mind, a tendril of something impossibly old unfurling within my own thoughts. The language, once a puzzle, was now a bridge, and I was trapped upon it, midway across. I stumbled away from the artifact, needing air, needing space, needing to escape the suffocating presence that now seemed to fill the entire chamber. The door to the outside world, usually so distant, felt like my only salvation. I pushed through the heavy portal, ignoring the surprised glance of the security officer, and emerged into the biting Antarctic night. My boots crunched on the packed snow, each step a desperate attempt to outrun the burgeoning horror in my skull. I walked without direction, driven by a primal need for distance. Before me, the vast, shimmering expanse of the frozen lake lay like a polished obsidian mirror under the desolate sky. The surface of the frozen lake was utterly still, yet as I stared, I saw it. Not with my eyes, not truly. But a ripple, a subtle tremor deep within the ice, mirroring the pulses I now felt emanating from the artifact, from within me. The glyphs, the language, the consciousness. It wasn't confined to the bunker. My mind, once my sanctuary, was now a window. And something ancient was looking through it, seeing the world anew, through my eyes. The translation was complete. The invitation had been accepted. And I was the host. The biting wind whipped around me, a relentless sculptor of frost and misery. My breath plumed in ragged clouds, each exhalation a desperate plea for clarity in the frigid air. The language, which had once been a labyrinth I navigated with cautious thrill, was now a conduit, a river of impossible knowledge flowing directly into my consciousness. It wasn't just translation anymore, it was absorption. Then it began, not as a vision, but as a memory that was not my own. I saw, or rather felt, the slow, majestic drift of colossal entities across oceans of starlight, their forms shifting like nebulae, their consciousnesses a symphony of frequencies too vast for human ears. I experienced their rise, an epic stretching beyond the comprehension of my species, their civilizations blooming and decaying like cosmic flowers, each cycle measured in the eons between stellar births and deaths. My own memories, once sharp and distinct, began to ripple and distort at the edges of these colossal alien impressions. A childhood afternoon spent tracing glyphs in a dusty tome, the feel of my mother's hand on my shoulder, the scent of old paper and ink. These fragments of my past flickered, losing their vividness, becoming mere echoes against the thunderous presence of the alien consciousness. It was as if a grand, ancient tapestry was being laid over my own, the vibrant threads of my life slowly obscured by patterns of unimaginable scale and complexity. The lake stretched out, an indifferent mirror to the cosmic chaos within me. Humanity. The word itself tasted like ash in my mouth. Our triumphs, our sorrows, our entire history, amounted to less than a single breath in their endless existence. The insignificance was a crushing weight, not merely intellectual, but visceral, stripping away every shred of my self-importance, every reason I had ever assigned to my own being. A sudden, sharp image pierced through the cosmic haze: my study, the worn leather of my armchair, the familiar scent of pipe tobacco and old books. It was replaced by a sense of deep, resonant sadness, a melancholic hum that permeated the alien consciousness, the sorrow of watching countless forms of life blossom and wither, the universe a vast, indifferent gardener. This wasn't just information I was translating, it was experience. These weren't visions, they were recollections. The realization struck me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. My past wasn't just fading, it was being reclaimed. Each alien memory that solidified within me chipped away at Arthur, the linguist, the man who had once believed he understood the nature of knowledge. My hands, once deft with ancient texts, now trembled uncontrollably. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides, a phantom weight. Was I Arthur, experiencing these alien memories, or was I merely a vessel, a temporary echo chamber for something immeasurably older, something that saw my entire existence as a mere footnote in its own unfathomable chronicle? My own past, once a comforting anchor, was now a phantom limb, and the future, once mine to imagine, was being utterly undone. My breath plumed in ragged clouds, each exhalation a desperate plea for clarity in the frigid air, yet the clarity I sought was a double-edged blade, promising only further horror. This was my last chance, I knew. A final, desperate gamble against the encroaching tide of something that had no name in any human tongue. I had to make them understand, before the invitation became an arrival. The cold was a mere prickle compared to the chill that had settled in my marrow, born from the knowledge of what lay dormant, stirring, beneath the world's fragile crust. Turning my back on the indifferent expanse of the lake, I stumbled towards the distant glow of the research complex. The wind pushed against me, a phantom hand urging me back into the desolate wild, but I pressed on, my boots crunching a frantic rhythm on the packed snow. Inside the sterile, humming corridors of the facility, the air was still and warm, a stark contrast to the biting exterior. My parka was still encrusted with rime, my hair matted with melted ice, but I paid it no mind. My urgency propelled me forward, past the silent laboratories where technicians hunched over readouts, past the storage bays filled with dormant equipment. I sought the central command room, where the lead researcher and the security chief held their grim vigil. The heavy doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the familiar tableau. The lead researcher, a woman with eyes like polished obsidian, looked up from a holographic display. Beside her, the security chief, a man whose face was a study in granite, barely shifted his gaze from a wall monitor showing thermal scans of the Antarctic shelf. We were preparing to send a retrieval team. There was no concern in her tone, only a detached assessment of a logistical oversight. My lungs burned. It's awake, I gasped, my voice raw, the words catching in my throat like shards of ice. The translation. It's not a record. It's a key. A command dot. The security chief finally turned, his gaze like a physical weight. Key to what, linguist? I tried to articulate it, to string together the horrifying tapestry of the glyphs, the resonant frequencies, the cyclical nature of its awakening. But the words, the human words, felt inadequate, clumsy. The UR form. The progenitor schema. It's a resonance, a frequency pattern. It's not about reading it, but becoming it. The language. It's a living architecture, a scaffold for something older than thought. My hands flew up, tracing patterns in the air, trying to illustrate the intertwining lines of the alien script, the way it shifted, pulsed, vibrated.
It's permeable. The membrane. We've thinned it.
The threshold is collapsing. The lead researcher exchanged a look with the security chief, a flicker of something unreadable passing between them. The junior analysts, who had paused their work, now resumed, their fingers tapping with renewed vigor, pointedly ignoring me. "Arthur," the lead researcher said, his voice now edged with a cool, clinical authority, "I understand your distress. The prolonged exposure to the artifact's unique energetic signature can be
disorienting." Disorienting?
I laughed, a harsh, broken sound that echoed strangely in the controlled environment.
It's not disorientation. It's revelation.
The world we know, it's a thin skin, a veneer.
Beneath it, the deep grammar of existence is shifting. The glyphs. They aren't symbols of something. They are the thing. They are the pattern holders. And we've given them voice.
My voice rose, cracking. It's not just a language, it's a contagion of being. It's already here, inside the words, inside me. I pointed to my head, my temple throbbing with the rhythmic pulse of the alien script.
Can't you hear it? The thrum?
The security chief stepped forward, his posture radiating a quiet, unyielding menace. "Arthur, you need to calm down.
Your reports have become less coherent over the last few days. We've noted a significant deviation from your baseline psychological profile." Deviation?
I roared, my voice raw with a desperate, futile anger.
My baseline was ignorance. My profile was blind.
Now I see the truth, and you call it madness because your own eyes are still veiled. I lunged forward, grabbing the lead researcher's arm, my fingers digging into the fabric of her uniform.
The patterns aren't just on the artifact.
They're in the ice, in the air, in the very geometry of this place.
It's absorbing us. We are becoming its echo, its conduit.
Her expression remained impassive, her arm unyielding in my grasp. The security chief moved swiftly, his hand clamping down on my shoulder with surprising force, pulling me away. His grip was like iron, a stark reminder of the organization's practical, brutal efficiency.
He's clearly
suffered a complete breakdown, the lead researcher stated, her voice flat, as if she were commenting on a faulty piece of equipment.
The psychological strain has become acute. He's no longer fit for duty. Not fit for duty?
I screamed, struggling against the chief's hold, the words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed torrent.
I'm the only one who is fit.
The only one who understands the imminent grammar of annihilation. You're blind, all of you.
Blind to the coming. The reclamation. Two other security personnel, silent and imposing, appeared from a side corridor, their movements swift and practiced. They took my arms, their grips firm, unyielding. I was pulled backwards, my pleas dissolving into incoherent babble, fragments of the alien script now mixing with my English, creating a garbled symphony of dread. "Initiate standard containment protocols," the security chief commanded, his voice echoing in the sudden, awful quiet of the room. "Isolate him in the auxiliary medical bay. Begin treatment regimen immediately.
No further access to the artifact, or any research materials.
He's compromised."
The word, compromised, hung in the air, a death knell. My warnings, my frantic, desperate pleas, were nothing but the incoherent ravings of a broken mind. The door hissed shut behind me, sealing me in a new kind of prison, one built not of steel and concrete, but of their profound, terrifying ignorance. The invitation had been accepted. The rough hands released me, and I crumpled to the cold, unyielding floor. Compromised. The word echoed, a hollow mockery of my sanity, yet within its reverberations, a different truth began to bloom. The world outside, the stark concrete walls of my confinement, the dim, flickering bulb overhead, it all receded, a distant, irrelevant hum. It was becoming. The glyphs, those impossible, bioluminescent scars on the artifact's surface, no longer required my physical proximity. Each curve, each impossible angle, now resonated with an innate understanding that bypassed the cumbersome logic of human language. I was not reading them, I was remembering them. My vision swam, and the stark room dissolved, replaced by an expanse of impossible blue. I was standing on a frozen lake, its surface an obsidian mirror stretching to an horizon that bled into an alien sky. A single, colossal fissure spiderwebbed across the lake, a jagged scar revealing depths of unimaginable blackness, a chasm that pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, like a trapped star. This was not a memory, nor a dream. It was a doorway, carved by the artifact into the very substrate of my mind. The air on the frozen lake was still, yet it thrummed with a silent song, a chorus of unfathomable ages. The glyphs, now colossal and vibrant, began to manifest on the surface of the ice, burning themselves into the crystalline structure, each one a syllable of a final, terrible decree. My breath hitched, a gasp lost in the vastness. I knew, with an absolute certainty that transcended mere intellect, that I was witnessing the culmination, the ultimate purpose. This was not a history, it was a blueprint. It was not a narrative, not a warning, but an instruction. It spoke not of summoning, but of reclamation. Not of invasion, but of reintegration. It had merely been dormant, waiting for the correct alignment, the precise vibrational frequency, the living conduit. And that conduit, I realized with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity, was me. The glyphs on the frozen lake pulsed, synchronized with the rhythmic beat of my own heart, now a frantic drum against my ribs. It was the sound of a lock turning, of a threshold parting. The instruction was simple, horrifying, and utterly compelling: unbind. To unbind was to shed the illusion of self, to dissolve the fragile boundaries of my individual consciousness, to offer the vessel. A profound ecstasy began to surge through me, an overwhelming current of belonging. They were part of a magnificent, terrible whole, and I was being invited to join. My individual thoughts, my fears, my very name, Arthur, felt like tiny, meaningless pebbles compared to the oceanic vastness beckoning me. The hum intensified, becoming a silent roar that threatened to tear my very soul from its moorings. My body, still confined in the mundane room, began to tremble uncontrollably, but it was not from fear. It was from a primal, overwhelming yearning. The glyphs on the ice flared one last time, incandescent, and I felt a pull, not outward, but inward, a gravitational force drawing me into the heart of the luminescence, into the chasm, into the embrace of the unbinding. The threshold was not a barrier to cross, but a state of being to achieve. And I was, with every fiber of my unraveling being, ready to step through. The final unraveling, the shedding of self, was not a violent rupture but a slow, profound exhalation. This was the unbinding, the grand awakening, and I, the determined vessel, stood at its harrowing center. The air in the subterranean bunker, usually a sterile hum of filtration and distant machinery, began to ripple. It wasn't a vibration I felt with my ears, but with the very fabric of my being. The stark, utilitarian lights overhead, which had bathed the translation chamber in a relentless glare for weeks, flickered. But it wasn't a malfunction. The light itself seemed to be reconsidering its nature. It bled from a harsh white into a spectrum of colors unseen by human eyes, shades of amethyst that pulsed with a living current, a viscous ochre that suggested ancient, buried earth, and a piercing cerulean that echoed the depths of the deepest ocean. These were not mere hues, they were resonant frequencies, each one a silent chord strumming against the scaffolding of my perception. The walls, once solid concrete, began to breathe. Not a physical expansion, but a shift in their very essence. The sharp angles softened, then blurred, then seemed to fold inward upon themselves, like pages of a forgotten book turning in slow motion. I watched, mesmerized, as a smooth, metallic surface warped into something organic, veined with what appeared to be fossilized nerves. The ceiling above me, previously a flat expanse, began to undulate, forming vast, cavernous domes that stretched upwards into impossible distances, beyond the limits of the bunker's physical dimensions. It was an architecture of dream and nightmare, where geometry held no dominion. A sound began to coalesce, not from any speaker or vent, but from the very air. It started as a low thrum, a resonant frequency that vibrated through my bones, a hum of immense, glacial pressure. Then, other sounds joined it, the grinding of tectonic plates shifting beneath continents, the whisper of ancient winds across desolate landscapes, the sharp crack of ice yielding to an unseen force. And through it all, a subtle, rhythmic thump-thump-thump, like a colossal heart beating beneath the world. My vision, already augmented by the glyphs, sharpened further, then shattered into a million facets. I saw not just the room, but through it, or perhaps within it. The metallic artifact on the pedestal before me, its surface still alight with the bioluminescent script, pulsed in synchronicity with the impossible rhythms. It was broadcasting existence itself. And then, I saw the lake. The chamber, once a confined space, now opened into an immense, cavernous expanse. Above me, not a ceiling, but a vast, opaque sheet of ice, miles thick, stretched into an endless, frozen firmament. Jagged fissures spiderwebbed across the glassy surface beneath my feet, each line a scar on the face of an ancient, sleeping world. I was the space between the cracks in the ice. I was the resonant hum in the walls. I was the impossible light, the shifting architecture, the primordial sound. The entity, which had been merely a translated concept, a latent power, was now flowing through me, a vast, indifferent current of ancient will. They were distant, irrelevant motes of dust, unaware of the true scale of the awakening. They saw a bunker collapsing. I saw a universe being born anew, folded into itself. My determination, once a human trait, had transmuted into an unwavering alignment. There was no turning back, no desire to. The surrender was complete. My consciousness expanded, not into emptiness, but into a fullness beyond comprehension, a tapestry woven with the threads of billions of years, of cosmic currents, of something that simply was before the stars ignited. I was a single drop in an ocean, yet the ocean coursed through me. The Grand Awakening was not just an event, it was a state of being, and I was becoming its living, breathing aperture. The frozen lake beneath me groaned, a sound both agonizing and triumphant, as something truly ancient stirred. The air within the containment chamber, once sterile and cold, now pulsed with a low, resonant hum, a vibration that felt less like sound and more like an internal tremor of the very atoms composing my flesh.
The bioluminescent script, once confined to the artifact's obsidian surface, began to bloom across the chamber walls.
It was not mere light, it was a living script, each glyph a miniature galaxy of meaning, unfurling like impossible blossoms. The steel bulkheads shimmered, then softened, their metallic sheen giving way to a viscous, organic translucence. I saw the very structure of the facility begin to breathe, its hard lines blurring, its geometry warping into curves that defied Euclidean principles.
The angles became fluid, the corners rounded into soft, pulsating nodes of light.
I stumbled, not from physical weakness, but from the sudden, disorienting shift in my perception of space. The floor beneath my feet was no longer solid concrete but a yielding surface, cool and strangely alive, like the skin of some vast, dreaming creature.
My vision fractured, not into pieces, but into layers, each revealing a deeper stratum of reality. And through it all, the glyphs, the terrible, beautiful glyphs, sang their silent song of ancient dominion. I looked towards the reinforced viewing port, the thick, bulletproof glass that offered a glimpse of the Antarctic wastes. But the glass was no longer clear. Beyond it, the landscape was changing. The endless white expanse of ice, the distant, jagged peaks, all began to ripple, to flow. It lay like a vast, dark eye, an obsidian mirror reflecting the indifferent stars. From its depths, or perhaps from beyond its depths, something began to stir. The ice, miles thick, groaned and fractured, not with the sound of breaking earth, but with a sound like the tearing of a cosmic membrane. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, not random fissures, but lines of impossible geometry, each glowing with the same internal light as the glyphs. It was not a creature of flesh or bone, not something that could be defined by terrestrial biology. It was a concept, made manifest. Its form was an architecture of impossible angles and non-Euclidean curves, shifting and reforming in an eternal dance. This was the entity. Not a being, but an existence, a fundamental principle of the cosmos that predated matter and energy. Its presence was a rewriting of reality, a dissolution of all I knew to be true. The facility, once a bastion against the unknown, now grown and twisted, its very atoms repatterning themselves to align with the alien geometry of the rising entity. The walls pulsed, the floor undulated, and the air thickened with a scent like ozone and ancient ice. The frozen lake was its eye, its mouth, its gateway. As the vast, shapeless form continued to ascend, a profound silence fell, a silence that swallowed all sound, all thought, all sensation. The glyphs on the artifact, on the walls, on the transforming facility, on the very surface of the lake, now resonated in perfect, terrifying harmony. They were not merely a language, they were the entity's blueprint, its song of awakening. My perception shattered. I was no longer seeing it, I was becoming of it. My human understanding was not merely broken, it was reforged into something else entirely. The facility, the lake, the world, all ceased to be external. They became extensions of a single, colossal consciousness. And I, Arthur, was no more. I was merely a fleeting flicker within its eternal, incomprehensible dream. Starting to stretch, to thin, to become a shimmering veil across a vista I had only ever glimpsed in the deepest recesses of my nightmares. My body, that familiar architecture of bone and sinew, was a distant hum, a vibrational memory. I was no longer merely in the world, I felt the world in me, a vast, intricate network of currents and echoes. The light of the bioluminescent glyphs, which had been the catalyst,
now resonated not from the artifact, but from the very air, from the dust motes dancing in the unseen currents, from the faint pulse of the floor beneath my phantom feet. It was a language without sound, a truth without words, pouring into the cavernous spaces where my thoughts once resided. My mind, if it could still be called that, was not empty, but filled with an ancient, silent roar, a symphony of forgotten eons. I moved, or rather, was drawn. The facility's corridors, stripped of their clinical sterility, became arteries, throbbing with a dark, vital energy. The hum of the ventilation system transformed into a deep, guttural thrum, a resonant heartbeat. I passed the observation windows where the overseers once watched, their faces now indistinct blurs, their forms like static in the periphery of my expanded vision. They were no longer observers, they were just components, their individual narratives subsumed by the larger, unfolding saga. The heavy blast doors, designed to seal away secrets, offered no resistance. They parted like water, not by mechanical force, but by an unspoken understanding. I felt the cold breath of the Antarctic night long before I saw it, a frigid embrace that was no longer alien but intimately familiar, like a memory from before memory. My senses, once limited, now stretched across the vastness, perceiving the slow, deliberate grind of the ice sheets, the infinitesimal tremor of the deep earth, the distant, rhythmic crash of unseen waves against a forgotten shore. The world was alive, not with the life I knew, but with something far older, far more profound. My gaze was pulled, inexorably, towards the shimmering expanse of the frozen lake. But it was not merely a reflection, it was a window, a membrane, a point of communion. I approached its edge, each step not my own, but guided by an unseen current, a gravitational pull towards a truth that had been patiently waiting. The ice of the frozen lake groaned, a deep, resonant chord that vibrated through my very essence. It was not the sound of stress or fracture, but of awakening, of recognition. Beneath the shimmering surface, I perceived not water, but a boundless depth, a swirling maelstrom of iridescent light. It was the same light that had emanated from the glyphs, now amplified, unbounded, radiating from the very heart of the earth itself. I understood this now, with a clarity that transcended human thought. The glyphs were not merely symbols, they were keys, unlocking not information, but pathways. And I, Arthur, the linguist, had been the unwitting hand, the chosen vessel for this ancient resurgence. My individual consciousness, the Arthur I had known, was a single drop in this newly formed ocean, dissolved yet expanded, lost yet found within the vast, terrible dominion that now suffused the world. The world was unchanged in its physical contours, but its soul had been profoundly, irrevocably altered. The ancient entity was not merely awake, it was woven into the fabric of existence, a subtle, undeniable presence. I stood at the edge of the frozen lake, no longer Arthur, but something else, something more. The cold air tasted of eternity, and the vast, silent awakening pulsed through me, a lingering echo that would never fade. The world was not destroyed, it was simply reclaimed. And I, a part of its reclamation, felt the strange, terrible peace of absolute belonging. The dominion was here, a subtle shift in the world's breath, a new, ancient rhythm that would beat forever.